everyone. Welcome to Scott Week, ScottCon, our business conference. And I am so extremely honored to have here as our guest today, Emily Cloke, the British Consul General in Los Angeles for pretty much the West Coast of the United States. And we also have Ms. Kelsey Deanne, our Vice President. And welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Kelsey. It's lovely to be invited on. So thank you for inviting me. I should say I'm the Consul General for the Southwest. So we cover Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Hawaii.
Perfect. I hope you get to travel to Hawaii often.
It's beautiful. I've been there once. So I went in December for the 80th commemorations of Pearl Harbor, and it was, you know, really touching ceremony, and it was a fabulous opportunity to see the state, and I definitely would like to go back soon.
Wonderful. Well, I want to let our viewers know that you are the senior representative of the UK government, as you were just mentioning, in Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Hawaii. And in this role, you promote trade and investment, scientific cooperation. You're tackling climate change in a big way, which is very near and dear to all of our hearts, and with the net zero campaign in Glasgow last year, and also creative and media collaborations, educational partnerships between the UK and the Southwest United States. And we are so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you. I'm excited for the conversation. So thank you for welcoming me.
Your recent roles include as Deputy CEO for the UK Africa Investment Summit hosted by the Prime Minister in 2020, and as a senior leader in the Department for International Trade Sectors Groups. You're overseeing export investment promotion for industry sectors, including but not limited to aerospace, advanced manufacturing, and education. And I just wanted to touch on the fact that we are going to be at a rugby match on April the 3rd together, promoting such education and opportunities for sports in a joint effort also with Britvic. So that's going to be very fun. And then you were setting up leading UK trade section in Tehran following the British Embassy. And tell us a little bit about that. I know that we have some prepared questions, but that is fascinating to me. Can you tell me about your role there and how that was for you?
I went to Tehran to set up the British trade section at the embassy, and that was after the nuclear deal happened. So I went there to help set up a team at the British Embassy and help support UK trade goals. So for me, it was a really interesting role, being involved in helping set up an embassy as well. And obviously I find it a huge honor to do work as a diplomat, as I do here in Los Angeles. So it was a really interesting role for me and a great opportunity.
That's amazing. And I can only imagine what that must have been like for you. And I'm anxious to hear more about that maybe at another time. But for now, talking more about the UK trade section and strategy following the reopening of the British Embassy in 2015, there in Tehran, and then again as head of the trade of the embassy in Sweden.
At the British Embassy in Stockholm, that was before I went out to Tehran. So again, a similar trade role, working with UK exporters and investors. You know, during my time working for the UK government, quite a lot of that has been on trade, the economy, and sort of wider international diplomacy. So that is where some of my background is, where a lot of my interest is, which again, sort of linking back to where I am now. I really enjoy the UK trade and economic side of the role, helping promote that and working with my wider team to support UK exporters and investors here, but also, you know, here in Los Angeles to bring US investment to the UK. So it's wonderful here to be able to continue to work on a trade and economic part of the portfolio, in addition to my wider responsibilities here. But I've been very lucky to work in a few countries as a diplomat, and it's been a great honor for me.
Wonderful. And so we're going to go ahead and launch into our prepared questions, but just also want to let our audiences know that you have a background and career as a lawyer in the City of London, and you did study law at Cambridge University. So very well done, you.
Thank you.
Kelsey, would you like to start the question?
Yes, absolutely. So you're at the British Consul General residence right now in Los Angeles, and it's an absolutely stunning building or house, really. And so tell us, what has it been like to come in as a new British Consul General during the pandemic? And what has it been like? And what are some challenges and maybe some silver linings that have happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great question. So I arrived here with my husband and my daughter in the autumn of 2020. And obviously, you know, in the midst of a pandemic, my arrival was very different to previous CG experiences, I imagine. You know, at that point in time, we did most of our work virtually. You know, I've been through periods, as you will have done as well, where, you know, there's been very restricted activity and not much engagement in person. So I think, you know, arriving at that time and given my role as a diplomat is partly to help build relationships, you know, help act as a bridge between the UK and the states that we represent. It was really at the forefront of my mind on how I could do that effectively in very different circumstances. So for me, you know, whereas there might have been lots of in-person meetings or introductions in person, I instead wrote out to a range of our key contacts, you know, a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of Teams meetings. And obviously it was working very differently. I miss that in-person engagement. I love getting to know people. I love the personal interactions, personal relationships that come with that. But I suppose a silver lining in how we were working is I could be on a Zoom call 1 hour with a stakeholder or a contact in Utah, and then the next hour with someone in Hawaii. And, you know, typically you wouldn't be able to do that. So I try and look at the bright side of things. And I think in terms of ways of working, I love the fact that things have opened up now and there's lots more happening in person, but it's nice to be able to blend that with the virtual engagement and do both, because I think both are here to stay. So for me, that's definitely been a silver lining. And I suppose the other silver lining is using it as an opportunity with my team in terms of how can we do things differently and innovatively. So, you know, whereas previously, you know, you might meet people in a large gathering in person, you know, it might be at the residence in the garden, but this time we were thinking, okay, how can we do that virtually? So let's do a virtual tea where we're also trying to highlight amazing British produce. Or, you know, a few of my Department for International Trade colleagues would look at interesting ways to blend other food and drink. So it was an opportunity for us to try and think a bit differently and, you know, think about how we could reach our audience in a different way through social media or, you know, you've got a podcast, for example. I think there's an opportunity to use the circumstances to try and work a bit differently. So I think that's been another silver lining. But you know, I think arriving in a pandemic, you definitely miss certain things. And I think for me, the other aspect, you know, with my team members not being able initially to meet many of them in person, and that's I've built up over time, but I definitely missed that at the start because, you know, it's a wonderful team and it's nice to be able to build those relationships in person. But I think you make the best of the circumstances, and I came here with a job to do, to represent the UK in this amazing part of the world. So for me, it was about how can I adapt to make the best of that with my team in the circumstances.
That's wonderful. And as we all pivot to the virtual world, and then we come back out into the real world, as it were, it will be really nice to meet people in person. But as you said, to continue this virtual world, as it has become very much a part of our everyday existence now, and in many ways makes us even more productive, I feel like. What are your top areas of focus in your role? And what projects or programs are you most excited about, especially for 2022 as we all come out into the world again?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, at a top level, my role is to lead the British consulate based in Los Angeles, and we represent the UK in the states that you mentioned, so Southern California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Hawaii. So we're here to promote government priorities and to build relationships and links with decision makers, but also the public here. So an example of that is climate change. A top priority for the UK government is tackling climate change with partners globally and living in a more sustainable world. So that's an example of one of the policy areas that we promote. But we cover a number of different interests, from climate change to the economic relationship between the UK and the US, and a lot of my team there are focused around helping UK exporters to come into this market and helping US investment into the UK. We also, through our consular team, help Brits in need through a number of particular services. So we have quite a wide-ranging set of responsibilities, and that for me, is both. It's a wonderful role. I feel very privileged to do it, and to also be in just this incredible part of the world like Los Angeles. It's absolutely beautiful, but there's so much creativity and innovation here. And similarly, like the states that we cover, really interesting things that are happening. So it feels like a privilege to be here, but with the knowledge of the UK, and see where we can see that there are unique partnerships to build on. And an example of that, we worked with the city of Los Angeles last year, and the UK and LA signed a memorandum of understanding, a partnership agreement on how we would work together on the transport sector to help decarbonize it in view of our climate change goals, but also to work on innovation. So I think working on areas like that I find fascinating. And I think for 2022, there'll be some great areas of opportunity to work on, from helping further our economic goals. The UK is actually the second largest investor in California. I think many people don't know that. So part of our role is about how do we share that story, but how do we increase it, through to continuing our climate change priorities, or working on things like the sports economy. Obviously, LA will be a big home for big sporting events, not least the Olympics happening in 2028. So some really interesting areas of work ahead, and I just feel very lucky to be in the role and help contribute to that with my team, and obviously the wider British community who play a really important role.
Absolutely. I love everything that you're speaking about, and tag teaming on to things about climate change. So you're an advisor on the creation of the world's first green investment bank. So tell us more about that. What is this, and what were the kind of things that you were doing?
So this, working on the creation of the UK Green Investment Bank, was one of my first roles working for the UK government. So it felt like a real privilege to be working on that. And it was a part of the government that was really fascinating for me. It had a lot of civil servants, people working with the government, working with lawyers and financial advisors on some really interesting projects. But I think for me, this was a really special one because it was about helping create something new, but focused on the transition to renewable energy. So the creation of that bank was around setting it up so it would focus on helping projects that would work on technologies that may have found it difficult to get financing from other sources. So I worked on the setup of the bank. So I didn't work for the institution itself, and my role there was to help take the legislation through Parliament as an advisor, and also on the setup of the bank. And that for me was also really nice, because I used to work as a lawyer. So when I was doing it, I wasn't working as a lawyer for the government, but I was working with lawyers. So I found it a really interesting experience, kind of, I guess, an opportunity to dip my toe back into, law and things like that. So it felt like a great project to work on. And I often have that in my mind, actually, when I'm working on climate change now, because, that was about 10 years ago, I suppose. It's a decent amount of time has passed since then. And working now for the UK government, tackling climate change is a real priority. So our consulate has been very focused on it. And the UK government in Glasgow hosted COP26 in November, and has done a lot of work with partners across the world, and how can we collectively make more ambitious commitments on transitioning to net zero and the transition to renewable energy. So it feels like a real privilege to be able to continue to work on that. And I think often of my days working 10 years ago, helping set up the Green Investment Bank.
So Emily, you led the Ministerial Private Office for Minister and Employment Relations and Consumer Affairs, Minister for Women and Equalities. Following you on Twitter, I know that you're a huge proponent for equality in the workplace. But can you tell us a little bit more about your feelings on that and your role there as a minister?
Yeah, of course. So the role that you're referring to, so I led the team working to the minister. I was based in the Department for Business at the time, but the minister also oversaw the Women Equalities portfolio. And some really interesting policies were introduced by the government at that time, which I often think about today, actually. So just as an example, one of the government policies that was introduced that the department worked on was the introduction of shared parental leave. So the opportunity for people to share their maternity leave. And when I had a baby, we actually did shared parental leave. So my husband, it was a fairly small amount of time, but we took the opportunity for him at the beginning of my daughter's life to add some time on, in addition to what the UK paternity leave entitlement was, and to enable us to transition as a family, and for both of us to spend time with my daughter, and then I continue to have the rest of the entitlement off. So it was great to benefit from that policy as well. And another example of a policy that was introduced at that time was on flexible working, the right for everyone to request it. So some really interesting policies that I think, are really valuable to support people to be able to have a family life and a work life, because it is a balance. And, for me, this is my first role as a parent. So I came to Los Angeles with my husband and my daughter. My daughter was 15 months at the time. And I went from maternity leave to this role. So this is actually my first experience balancing work and parenthood. And, it's busy. I want to make sure I'm doing a good job, my role as Consul General, but also, as a parent, and spending good quality time with my daughter and being there for the exciting, developments that there are as a little one. So that's really important to me, I think, and it's really important for other parents to be able to do both as much as possible. So I think, diversity, equality in the workplace, all of these things are incredibly important. And I think, the UK government supports that, but also as a consulate, diversity, having lots of people from with different experiences, different backgrounds, it makes us stronger. So I am a really strong believer in that too.
That's wonderful. And I remember when I remember when we would travel over to, just offshoot here, sorry girls, but we would travel over to Scotland actually in the early 2000s, and women on a certain grade level in bagpiping weren't allowed to, actually, it was unspoken, but we weren't allowed to compete. So we've come very far since those days. So very well done. And thank you for all of your work that you've done there.
Well, I played so many people are, involved in those policies and had different roles. So I'm grateful for being in the department at the time, and for being in some of the roles there to work with others who are, real experts in those areas. I wasn't an expert in areas like flexible working, but there were some of the policies that in that role we helped work on with others as well.
That's amazing. I'm so excited to see, as you continue your role in Los Angeles and the Southwest, of how you continue to improve topics on climate change and equality and diversity in the workplace and all the other things, and being a mom. I mean, that's a huge thing to go from raising a daughter in the UK to Los Angeles. It's complete culture shock in a lot of different ways. But how can Brits and Americans in Los Angeles and the Southwest, how can they get involved with what you're doing and some of the programs and the initiatives that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we work really closely with our British community, who also have a lot of expertise. So we like to learn from that, from Brits working in, areas like the space sector through to the film industry. It's really important that we learn and work with the British community. So we always really welcome insights from others who are also keen to work with us. I think there are a number of different ways, but I'll mention, one as an example, only because we launched it today. But I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that, we've been trying new initiatives on things like social media, different ways to engage with audiences. And we started a new initiative called UK in LA Live. It's an Instagram live series where we talk to different Brits and Americans doing really interesting things in different sectors. So we held our first interview today, actually. So, we would love the British community to tune into things like that, share it on social media. And similarly, the social media is a great opportunity to see some of the work that we do, and whether it's on how we promote climate change, promote tackling climate change, through to the work on the economic relationship. But there are so many ways, and I love meeting different members of the British community, and this conversation now, for Scott Week. It's really lovely to speak to both of you.
Oh, and it's lovely to speak to you. We are really, truly honored to have you on here today with us. And what we'll do is we'll put in the description links to the social media. We're going to link to your new Instagram channel. That's exciting. We'll go ahead and share that as well. And then everyone should also follow you on Twitter. I found your Twitter feed very fascinating and interesting, full of diverse information and things that you enjoy. So everyone, please follow Emily Cloke. Emily, it's wonderful to meet you here. We will see you soon in person, I'm sure. Thank you for being supportive, and thank you so much for being on here with us today.
Cindy, Kelsey, thank you so much for welcoming me and for the conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Emily. It's been a pleasure and an honor.